I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to the Mental Fitness and Resilience Seminar in association with equuip. My name is Hannah and I'm the Education Coordinator here with the ITBA. We are very lucky to have three incredible speakers tonight to talk about what can be a very challenging and a very difficult topic, but one that's incredibly important to every individual in the industry. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their time tonight. We have Dr. Jennifer Pugh, Senior Medical Officer with the IHRB, Lisa O'Neill, Welfare Coordinator with equuip, and Dr. Ciara Losty, Sports Psychologist and involved with the Jockey Pathway. And I suppose without further delay, I'll now hand over to our first speaker, who is Dr. Ciara Losty, to start the seminar.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for the lovely invite here this evening. Listen, thanks a million for this invitation to speak and discuss, I suppose, my role a little bit and give you some insights into working with the jockeys, our research with the trainers as well, a little bit into kind of the mental fitness side of things, and I suppose how we can support one another within the horse racing industry. So look, I'm not sure if anybody or I suppose is familiar with sports psychology or specifically what my role is. So I work with on the Jockey Pathway. So I provide sports psychology services and supports to all jockeys that can avail of that particular service. I have been to 2 Olympics. And now I'm currently working with the Paralympic team in preparation for Paris. So I work in that space. I was on the ground in Tokyo with the Irish eventing team as well. So even though I don't come from an equestrian background, there's a lot of horses in my life at the moment. I also run the MSc in Applied Sport and Exercise Psychology in SETU, formerly WIT as well. I work with any individual athletes, work with teams, and I'm generally part of the sports science and medical team that supports the athletes on their journey through high performance. So look, really what we're here to talk about tonight is the mental health issues, some of the common mental health disorders that have presented, and some of the kind of starting statistics to give you an insight into the background of what's happening live on the ground in your particular area. There's been a lot of research into mental health, mental fitness, common mental health disorders, and things are kind of changing, I suppose, from a discussion perspective, but it is really an area that is being discussed more. It's an area that we're talking about a little bit more in society, and it's an area that has been researched more. But I would say probably overall it is probably lacking behind some of the like physiological sciences or some of the sciences that actually support the kind of the physical performance of certain things. So I want to give you an insight into some of those particularly startling headlines of newspaper articles that are popping up there. Athletes and jockeys are exposed to unique stressors that may impact their mental health and their well-being. And jockeys are actual athletes as well. Sometimes they don't conceptualize themselves as that, or they don't see themselves as that from a perception perspective. But there are very unique competition, organizational, and performance stressors that are unique to those particular spaces. If we look at jockeys' unique stressors, there are very specific competition-based stressors. They're also the way the racing industry is organized, the stressors within that space as well. They're the interpersonal stressors. So things like the relationships with people on the yard, the relationship with the jockey and the trainer, the relationship with the jockey and the owners, the jockey trainer. There's a whole complex interplay there as well. They're also career-based stressors. So we feel that and maybe our career isn't moving at a speed or a trajectory that we would like it to be moving at, that can also create a stress for a particular jockey. When we looked at and explored common mental health disorders among Irish jockeys, the prevalence and risk factors, and some of these statistics are pretty startling. So this survey surveyed 84 jockeys in total. Now, that's not to say that all jockeys suffer from these particular issues. It's that they met the risk factor for these particular common mental health disorders. So 61% of the jockeys that were surveyed described some kind of alcohol misuse. So that relationship with alcohol is something that probably needs to be explored with further research. 35% of the jockeys met the criteria for depression. 27% met the criteria for anxiety, and 19% met the criteria for psychological distress. And we compare and we put these statistics in line with other sports and other athletes in other areas. The jockeys genuinely are outliers. They're presented with much more higher common mental health disorders in comparison to other athletes in a particular space. Other things to explore and look at. The study found that nearly 80% of jockeys participants met the criteria for at least one mental health disorder. And again, this is a disclaimer. It's not that they have these mental health disorders, it's that they're meeting the criteria for these particular things. Burnout was a common feature as well, that burnout dimensions positively associate with distress and anxiety. So if a jockey's experiencing or feeling burnt out, they are ranking and rating their distress and their anxiety scales as higher. So burnout is something that we have to possibly consider within the industry as well. The high prevalence of adverse alcohol use, binge alcohol, that type of thing. So the relationship with alcohol for the people, for the jockeys working in the industry, is something that needs further exploration as well. And over a quarter of the jockeys were contemplating retirement for the sport. And that's something kind of to think possibly in line with the actual burnout as well. So burnout and possible retirement may lead to kind of, I suppose, ambiguity about what you're going to do with your career, where you're going to go with your life, which may fuel that anxiety as well. When we explored kind of the overall, we looked at I suppose a bigger study looking at and examining all of the research in relation to jockeys. Jockeys reported higher depressive and anxiety symptoms compared with other elite athletes. Substance misuse was a common thread again, particularly alcohol use, and it's greater amongst jockeys than any other elite athletes as well. So within this, I suppose, again, may come back to, do jockeys actually perceive themselves as athletes or in that elite athlete space as well? Distress symptoms appear comparable with other elite athletes, but there are very specific risk factors. And why it's important to understand these risk factors, because if we understand these risk factors, we can put in, I suppose, programs and supports in place very early. So if a jockey is injured, they have perceptions of high levels of stress, they feel that they're burning out, they have career dissatisfaction, and the contemplation of retirement are all placing jockeys at a higher risk factors for common mental health disorders. The complex interplay between making weight and mood is also something that's interesting, and something I would see a lot of my applied practice as well, in that making weight negatively impacts jockeys' mood and attitudes towards eating. Their lower competitive riding weights are associated with more disordered eating attitudes as well. So that's, again, a very unique kind of place in where jockeys are, that making weight can actually affect their mood as well. So we know that it can affect you from a physiological perspective, but it also is affecting you from a psychological perspective. So what are some of the barriers and what are the facilitators? What are the things that will actually help jockeys seek out support within Ireland as well? And most of the jockeys do not seek out help from any of the professional mental health support services that are there. Now, that is something that is changing. We will be tonight discussing some of the support services that are available there for the jockeys, for the trainers. But I suppose there is a kind of common culture and a little bit of stigma about seeking out support services, and I will explore those later as well. So the barriers to help seeking for jockeys, so things that stop jockeys engaging in the support services, are the negative perceptions of others. So they're concerned about what other people perceive of them, maybe what other people will perceive if they find out that they're engaging in some kind of support service as well. Something to think about maybe on your own yard, like what is the cultural norm? What is, I suppose, the cultural norms really refer to like how things are done around here. So is engaging and in help seeking behavior something that's part of every day? If somebody has an injury, if they have a mental health difficulty, are they kind of open about those things, or is it something that people kind of keep secret? Low mental health literacy, so not actually knowing where to seek help, or maybe that some of the feelings that somebody is actually feeling may actually be in that mental health disorder space. So kind of not understanding maybe what they are feeling and where to actually get the help from. When we explore deeper and we interviewed some of the jockeys, when you look at some of the, I think some of the quotes to hear from the jockeys themselves are really, really powerful, and kind of conceptualize what we're talking about in a much more qualitative nature. Then racing is such a one man's game. You're paddling your own canoe, and the knock on when it comes to your mental health. You think you think I must be strong by myself. I'll just keep it to myself. I handle everything else. I drive myself everywhere. I sort all of my rides. I sort my finances. You just become independent because you absolutely have to be. And I think it drips into the psychological side as well. So that's interesting. That level of kind of stoicism, that level of kind of independence, which can be kind of good and support a jockey when they're kind of driving themselves, making those decisions, making those really healthy life decisions. But sometimes maybe they're afraid to ask for help in other areas. And that's a key kind of message to get across, in that it's okay to seek out support, and those supports are there as well. Another jockey then, it's one of those sports where you need to be seen to be grafting every day. You're driving miles and miles each week and you're dieting. It's a madness. You're throwing a horse over a fence. It's kind of a thing where people expect jockeys to be kicking hard and that they never have a weakness. They never want to be open and speak about mental health problems to like a counselor or somebody like that. So just again, I suppose the idea, there's a little bit of loneliness, I think, actually there in that quote about how they're on their own and how much of a kind of sole trader you are, but that it is a weakness that if you expose yourself or feel that you're exposing yourself by asking for help. The jockeys, have this persona of being tough and hardy. They feel they kind of have to maintain this persona to everyone else and that the public, because they might be singled out as being weak and if they come out and say anything. So confidentiality is a big part of my work as well, and that jockeys are very concerned about, if they actually seek out support, how confidential that particular service would be, and how will other perceive that. If a jockey knows that if a trainer knows that a jockey is getting some kind of mental health support, are they maybe going to make different decisions about putting them up on a horse? Will that affect their perception of that jockey from a hardiness type of perspective? So these are kind of some of the things just to reflect and think on as we go through the workshop tonight then. Okay, so that's kind of the jockey space. So we also completed a study on racehorse trainers' mental health, the prevalence and risk factors. And this again surveyed 124 trainers. Some of you on the call may have actually completed some of our research. So this is really new research in this particular area. The prevalence and symptoms of common mental health disorders may be greater among racehorse trainers than other rural occupations such as farming. So we compare racehorse trainers to farming sometimes, in that they're kind of independent sole traders and similar type of outdoor work. Again, obviously there are nuances and very specific kind of unique factors to being a racehorse trainer as well. When we looked at the prevalence rate, so think again, compare maybe to the jockeys, the prevalence rates of depression were 41%, adverse alcohol use 38%, distress 26%, anxiety 18%. Again, this is a disclaimer with some of these statistics. This does not mean all of the 124 people were suffering from depression, distress, or anxiety. They met the case as the cases. They met the actual threshold for these particular common mental health disorders. Again, some of the things that were the link to the risk factors are career dissatisfaction, lower levels of social support, and financial difficulties increase the likelihood of meeting the threshold for depression, distress, and anxiety. So again, this is different again to what the jockeys are, because the jockeys have unique stressors, but also the trainers have unique stressors. And again, social support, financial difficulties increase the likelihood of meeting those common mental health disorders. The prevalence of symptoms of common mental health disorders, with nearly 1 in 2 of the trainers, 45% who were actually surveyed, meeting the criteria for any common mental health disorder at one time. And the most prevalent of those ones was actual depression as well. So again, some of the unique stressors that the trainers disclose, that racehorse trainers play an important role within the racing industry, but the occupation is not without its difficulties. They are under pressure from owners to ensure high performance at high standards, and they're also required to manage the staff and take responsibility for the horses' welfare in the respective yards. So they're looking after staff welfare, and you're looking after horses' welfare, which again is a very kind of high stressful and not a 9-to-5 type role, or somewhere where you can just leave your job at the gate when you leave the yard. So looking forward for trainers. So what does this mean again about kind of how we can kind of target our supports and where we can target the research for them? Implementing very specific bespoke interventions for racehorse trainers is a challenge. until the research and understanding around the varying areas of mental health and mental illness within this population is better understood. So we need to kind of understand. So we know we have some of the insights and the statistics there. So maybe we need to look and explore at what is actually going on. We need to interview some trainers. We need to kind of find out, get under the hood and see what's going on there so we can actually implement bespoke interventions and bespoke supports for trainers as well. So the next step really is to move beyond the presence of the symptoms. So kind of move and get below the statistics and examine other areas that may impact mental health, such as identity, stigma, and those types of things as well. Other things that we found that actually help jockeys and will help trainers to engage in help-seeking behaviours that encourage people to seek out support is education. So the more we understand, so things like tonight where we're educating ourselves and discussing these topics, which are hard topics to discuss, but they expose us, as the more we discuss these things, they disclose us and expose us to what support services are there, what maybe are kind of the behaviours that kind of fit into common mental health disorders as well. Also social support. So if you're a trainer on the call, it's really think about what support are you getting for yourself that will actually protect your own mental health, and what support can you provide to other professionals on your yard, you know, the stable staff, your family, the friends, the jockeys, that type of thing, because you might be a key person that can actually help somebody engage in support services too. We also now know, which we didn't know before, and I would have queried and questioned some of these things, when athletes or high profile people come out and actually disclose that they've, I suppose, battled through kind of common mental health issues, did that actually seek, or did that actually support anybody else engaging in any support services? And we do have some research now within the jockey population to say that, yes, actually high profile disclosures from other jockeys is actually very helpful for jockeys to engage in help seeking behaviours. In that if we connect to somebody's story, it means that we can actually reflect on ourselves and maybe kind of go, well, if that person was struggling, then that person's at the top of the game and I'm struggling, maybe I need to engage in some support services that they actually have identified as well. And moving forwards as a community, I suppose organisations within the racehorse community must begin to place emphasis on well-being and mental health. And I think this is like one piece of the jigsaw here tonight. This is one of a suite of workshops that are going to be offered. But again, Elisa and Jennifer will outline the new plans within equuip and the collaboration between all the different organisations that are happening here to really focus on our self-care and our well-being. Again, a complex piece we have research undergoing in the area is dual careers and planning for retirement. We are dealing with in a space with people who are often early school leavers and maybe have an over kind of complex identity with being a jockey or with working in the race horse industry. So sometimes that, you know, that a jockey might find it really difficult to actually move on from their actual career because they don't have another plan in place at all. So that kind of support for dual careers and developing yourself outside of the racing industry is really important. Again, there's a complex nature of stigma and help seeking. So there's the stigma and the actual, I suppose, the shame that some people actually may feel about engaging and asking for help. And I will touch on that again at the end of the presentation. Can we develop mental health literacy among jockeys? I think we are doing this. I think jockeys, trainers and stable staff, we're becoming far more aware of that, and we've far more disclosure within the racing community, and we are discussing and talking about that, and that certainly helps to develop mental health literacy. Another piece that we don't really have any research on, which would be something else to explore, is the impact of social media use and trolling on jockeys and trainers' mental health. This is something I suppose that jockeys, trainers have to use to maybe promote themselves, promote their yards, but we're not really sure about the impact of those things because there often is trolling on particular individuals. Okay, so I'm just going to hand over. So I'm going to stop share my screen and hand over.
Everyone, and I just want to say thanks so much for attending. It's great to have such a big attendance here today, and yeah, it's obviously can be a sensitive topic to talk about sometimes, but I think we're taking the correct steps and actually discussing it and being able to be aware of it, and as Ciara alluded to, educating ourselves and creating a culture of awareness. And just to give you a background on myself, I recently taken up the role as industry welfare coordinator within equuip in IHRB. So that entails actually supporting and delivering some welfare and wellbeing programs specific to industry personnel. And I suppose it's more so creating a culture of awareness and being able to support those conversations that need to be heard as well. So this is a lovely stepping stone to be able to introduce some of the topics that we're going to be able to grow and develop and evolve within the industry as well. But just as you can see from the slide, just to give you a breakdown on the thoroughbred industry within Ireland, I know these statistics are a little bit dated at the moment. They come from the Deloitte report back in 2017, but I know we will have an update on figures in the next couple of months as well. But it just gives you an overview of the people that are actually in the industry. And Ciara spoke about the jockeys and the trainers, and this more so focuses on the staff that are there within training yards, within the breeding sector as well. And it's very important to recognise that these are actually the largest population. They're the largest cohort within the thoroughbred industry as well, and they're the most important. You know, they are the people that are the backbone of the industry. They're passionate, they're dedicated, they're determined to commit their lives to the care and welfare of horses, to working with horses. And it's important as their dedication is vital to the welfare of the industry as well. And you can just see from the breeding sector as well how many people are actually involved in it, and obviously specifically from the training yards too. I just, something I actually meant to touch on before I started off, like I hope everyone who's on the call here today is able to take something from this seminar, and it's great to have it as well. And obviously just from my own personal experience, I obviously worked in tax doing spotting before, and I had the privilege of being on the Irish National Stud course, and also working in Yeomanstown stud for a breeze of season. They were very good to me as well, and doing sales work for Castlebridge. So I dabbled my toe in a bit of the breeding sector myself before I decided to focus my career on my riding. But it's just, I suppose we unite together because we're such a unique industry. And I think we're all chasing the dream. I think we're all chasing the one thing to, I mean, maybe breed a foal that's going to achieve Group 1 or Grade 1 success, and maybe sell on a horse at the sales that's going to achieve that too. And in my previous role, it was maybe to be able to get to ride something along those lines as well. But something I noticed throughout my career when we're all chasing the dream is that it's amazing sometimes when I was lucky to get to ride some good horses. When you're propelled into the limelight, it's amazing how many people want to be your friend when you're kind of propelled into the limelight a little bit. And it's very important to realize that success does not define you. It's your actions and your behaviors that actually define you. So it's very important to realize that we all have to be unite together, and it's important to be kind and to be nice. And there's no point in chasing the dream if you're not a good person. And I mean, whether it's somebody who handed you your coffee this morning, or if it's somebody who drives a tractor on the farm, or the likes of someone who's standing up a foal for you at the sales, it's very important to be nice and to be kind, and be kind to all those people who are involved in the thoroughbred industry here in Ireland. So it is the largest cohort, and it's very important that Ciara spoke about the statistics and the research that's focused on the jockeys and the trainers. It's important to note that there's actually very little research in Ireland that's focused on the staff within the yards. And I suppose we here at HRI are hoping to be able to I suppose maybe make action on that as well, you know, because everyone, no matter who they are, whether they're jockeys and trainers, and we've seen the statistics that are quite frightening at times as well, but no matter who you are, I know everyone has a bad day or dark day, and some may be able to cope and some may not have the tools to cope. And, you know, it's like, you don't take your car to the garage when it breaks down, you service it regularly so it's able to ferry you to and fro. So it's very important to be able to look after yourself. And I know Jennifer later on will talk about self-care and good habits and how to keep them up, but often the greatest strength is to be able to ask for help. And I think it's very important that everyone realizes that there is support out there for anyone that does need help. But I'll just go on to the next slide. Just to move along, is I mentioned that the cohort that we have, which is the largest cohort actually, is the stable staff. Just 1 second, we just move the slide along. Perfect, thanks. Yeah, so we actually have very little research in Ireland on staff within yards of any means, stud staff, training staff. And this is just a small flavour and a small segment of some of the research that is available. And I don't want to go into too many statistics or anything, but statistics are very important because it's the evidence that's there, it's evidence-based that, you know, there is, research is so important because it's information gathering, it's exploratory, it also discovers and uncovers things. So it's very important to have research to be able to place interventions into our industry as well. But just to enlighten people, in a study in Australia by Speed and Anderson in 2008, a lot of stable staff, you know, related to feeling fatigue and high levels of experiencing stress and poor sleep habits, you know, which is all very prominent. And I think often loads of people can relate to that too. But more notable, in 2019 in the UK, there was a study which revealed 72% of stable staff actually experienced symptoms which related to stress, anxiety and depression, which is extremely high. And just to move on to a more recent study by Duke et al. In 2021, I suppose it really revealed some of the stressors that are possibly encountered within the working environment by staff within yards, which related to high workload, a poor work-life balance, and a lack of training and career progression as such. And continual exposure to these kind of elements can significantly impact health and well-being, and can increase the likelihood to develop a common mental health disorder as well. So it's very notable that, you know, these are statistics, but they're real. They are people. They are the individuals, and they're the people that we need to, I suppose, be able to develop interventions within this country that we hope to do in the future as well. But often, you know, there's, with regard to the 2021 report, retention and recruitment, a lack of retention and recruitment can have a negative impact also on people within training yards, and that can impact fatigue and also impact burnout and chances of compassion fatigue, which is emotional and physical exhaustion from caregiving, which can happen in nursing and veterinary and any animal caregiving industries as such. But also, as Ciara related to earlier on about farmers are very relatable to people within the equine industry and like the whole thoroughbred industry, and they're a unique cohort in themselves. They often are situated in rural, isolated places. They've isolated work, obviously very comparable to the high workload that they encounter too. The demands, they're obviously the caregivers for animals, and there's an aspect of an on-call as well. And it just gives you a flavour. This evidence research, which is composed by Siobhan O'Connor in DCU, you know, farmers, they're sole traders themselves, so comparable to the thoroughbred industry, but 21% suffered with low mood. You know, over half of those research suffered with sleep issues and burnout, which obviously is, you know, it negatively impacts mental and physical health. And as Ciara mentioned before, in relation to jockeys and trainers, they experience the same levels of same barriers with relation to help seeking. Obviously 40% reported that they previously sought help for their mental health, but only 21% actually sought help with mental health professionals or GPs. And with the obviously relation to the barriers, there's the negative attitude, and often there's a low, I suppose, mental health literacy as well. So that can also be quite negative with regard to that. And just this is actually, I was very lucky to be under the guidance of Ciara as well. I recently completed a master's degree in sports psychology, and I wanted to focus my own thesis on something that was quite important to me, and specifically because it's a population that's very understudied, and there's no study of its kind done here in Ireland. So I suppose focused my research on staff within yards as well, and racing yards. And this just obviously, it's anecdotally very knowledgeable within the industry that there is a bit of a staff crisis in regards to recruitment and retention. And it is fine when we look at the papers and we look at the social media and we look at job posts everywhere, but there's no actual evidence to suggest that, you know, it's anecdotally there, but you have to have the research behind it to be able to put interventions in place. But it revealed obviously that there is a stretched workforce out there that are obviously compensating for a staff crisis at the moment. It's growing and escalating, and it negatively impacts mental and physical demands on the workforce, which are already there. There's increased workloads, heightened demands, intensified pressure, and long hours, which are a multitude of stressors which are experienced by people. It's very self-explanatory. If you have 5 or you have 10 people who are working with you, and mean, one decides he doesn't want to go into work, and one decides he doesn't want to work there anymore. You know, there's increased workload on the people who remain there and who do show up to work and who are loyal. And it's important that we look after their benefits and their needs. But as I said, varying stresses within the working environment may have a negative causality effect on psychological strain and stress levels. And as I said, it's so important to look after the people, and the well-being of the people who are the backbone of our industry is vital to racing and the whole thoroughbred industry overall. I'm just going to hand over to you, Jennifer here, and she's going to talk you through a little bit more.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Dr. Jennifer Pugh is my name. I'm the Senior Medical Officer with the Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Board. I've been in that role since 2019, when the great Dr. Aidan McGoldrick, I should say, stepped back from that role. My general trade is as general practitioner, and I've been working in there for the sort of 5-10 years before that in general practice. But I have, I suppose, a fair bit of exposure to the racing industry separate to my my medical career, and my colleagues in work used to say that being a doctor was actually my hobby, and really racing was my job even before I took this role. But I would have grown up with the great privilege of being the farmer's daughter, and Daddy was a small breeder and trainer outside of Banbridge in County Down. So, you know, we got to grow up with mares and foals and making a long trek down to Wexford to various fires with the mares. I rode in point to points. I was very lucky to have my amateur license. I rode for about, probably longer than I should have, nearly 11 seasons. And I did a lot of stud farm work. So Scarborough House Stud at the time was right beside us, and it kept an entire community of teenagers in employment and put us through college. And my entire family and pretty much all of my friends still continue to make their living in the thoroughbred industry. I was probably quite lucky in that I got to do it as my hobby. All of my interactions and exposure was from, I wasn't doing it to make a living, so I didn't have the same pressures that many of you face, but nonetheless, I'm certainly well aware of the challenges, and very privileged that I get to combine my sport and my hobby with my work. So really what I want to go through is what this all means, because we can see from what Ciara and Lisa have spoken about with the trainers and the jockey and the stable staff research, we can kind of draw some comparisons with where we are in the breeding sector. And we know there are issues there, we know there are stresses, and we know there's lots that we need to do about it. But I suppose really just to try and make some sense of where we are. And I think we're very lucky that we're living in an era when this subject is less taboo and we are able to talk about it, but it can be a little bit overwhelming and a little bit confusing. And if you Google anything to do with mental health or mental well-being, you know, we're kind of overloaded with the various terms that I've just fired up on the screen here. And like I said, there's a lot more willingness to talk about this subject, and that's why you're all here on the call tonight, which is fantastic. But there is still a stigma, and there's still a fear surrounding this. What if I ask for help? What if I do have a problem? And being able to recognize that you may have an issue there, how to get help, who to ask, how to ask, what to ask. And for most of the people in any space, there's a lot of factors will play into how you're feeling with your mental health. And I think the kind of topic or the title we put in this was mental fitness and resilience, because it's to try and see where we can be in this space to try and prevent us ending up with a mental illness such as depression or anxiety, and what we can be doing in that space of self-care. And it's very bespoke and it's very unique to each person. It's bespoke to our industry and the challenges that we have, which are so unique. But each individual and each individual person, you know, has to find their own way through and navigate this space. I kind of like this slide. It's really for me about balance, and our mental health and our mental fitness really is about managing what are normal emotions and our normal reactions to normal situations. And a lot of these emotions have to live together and do live together, and we generally manage them quite well to lead what we call a normal life. But a lot of it is about giving ourselves permission to feel some of these emotions. And I think when I look at this, you may or may not agree with me, but the red angry face is one that most of us have no issue expressing, because we all get angry and frustrated and mad, and we have a good rant and a good rave. So even though anger is a very negative emotion, it's one we're probably all the most at ease with and the most experienced with. The one beside it is the love and the showing compassion and care. And I think that can be a little bit more tricky with Irish people in general. Had a very interesting conversation with a group of my girl pals up at home a few weeks ago, and we make the effort to try and catch up every 6 or 8 months if we can. And we were talking about exactly this space, because we're probably, as some people might suggest, we're making our kids a bit soft, because I tell my boys 10 times every day that I love them. And we hug in the morning, we hug when they come home from school, we hug at night time. It's all very tactile and all very lovely. But we were comparing this back to how we were brought up in the relationship with our parents. So I love my parents no less than I love my own children, but we don't hug. I don't know when last I ever told my mum or dad that I love them, because it's just a very different generation. And you know, I have a twin sister as well, and we joked about given how close we've been our entire life. And we had this bet that particular night we were out, would we hug at the end? And I still didn't hug my twin sister. And so love is a very unique and a very difficult expression for some people. And we need to show compassion, and we need to show kindness, and we need to show that we care, whether that's about someone you're close to or someone, a work colleague or an employee. And it's a hugely important emotion. The happy one, we're probably all relatively okay at it, but the kind of red flags appear whenever somebody can't feel happy. When you see somebody within a yard who maybe was once the life and soul and took a joke and then joined in with all the crack, and now they're not, that can be a red flag, and that falls into the teary face emoji when we feel sad. And again, we need permission sometimes to feel sad. Ciara spoke of that kind of stoic, or Lisa, sorry, that stoic outlook that we have to have, stiff upper lip, everything's fine, head down, keep plowing on. But if you do that for a long time and you can't accept sad emotions, you can't, you know, that will cause issues with your mental fitness in itself, because you can't keep those emotions buried all of the time. And yet, if we have those emotions as a predominant feature, that also affects our mental fitness and eventually our mental health. It's about these various emotions. This is only 4 of the emotions we have, but it's trying to maintain that balance and trying to make sure that these are all living, that it's okay to feel these emotions at times once we're not becoming overwhelmed by them. So just a little bit of a definition on mental fitness, and I thought this might be important, because if we're all trying to help improve our mental fitness and our resilience, what are we actually aiming for? What does it mean? Where are we trying to get to? And that might kind of help us again find that pathway and to navigate as to how we get to a place where our mental fitness is in good shape. So I built up a few definitions, just really to get you thinking about it and to kind of form formulation in your own mind of what mental fitness is to you. And the WHO, who we all know now since the pandemic and all the work that they did, but they define mental fitness as being a state of well-being in which the individual realizes their own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. The first part of this, I don't mind. I think it's probably fair to say that it is very unique to your own abilities and your ability to cope and to the normal stresses of life. And I would really stress within that it's a normal stress to you. So what a normal stress might be to me versus what it is to you could be 2 very different things. But if something is making you feel stressed, then you're stressed. Just because somebody else may not share that, or somebody may be seemingly sailing through a similar situation, this is the normal stress of the life, but it's of your life. The second part, I think, is very useful for society and for employers, that someone works. Good mental fitness allows someone to work productively and fruitfully and to make a contribution to their community. I would kind of say mental fitness is more about how you feel and the benefits to yourself, which secondarily it will help you to give back to your work and to your community. But predominantly mental fitness is for you, rather than in turn it's for your employer, but it's really more about what works and what fits for you. This, I think, is from the American Psychology Society. It defines mental fitness as includes self-acceptance, self-esteem, resilience, and the ability to manage strong emotions. And I go back to that previous slide with the 4 emojis, that those are all normal emotions, but they can be stronger at times depending on the situation you find yourself in, or the challenge, or whatever's going on in your life. And having good mental fitness allows you to manage those emotions and not let one overwhelm you or overpower you in any way. And I'll talk a little bit about self-esteem and resilience in the next couple of slides. And then the last one, my screen is covering that, so I can't read it. Yeah, so your capacity to respond to life's challenges with positive rather than negative mindset. And I kind of like that concept of a positive versus a negative mindset. I would say my own experiences when I have something that's challenging or stressful, my probably initial instinct is that negative, and I'll have a good old rant and rave, and it's a disgrace, and how did they do that, and that's really unfair, and what were they thinking, and I get it all out, and the person beside me has to listen to it all, and then I'll box it away and set it to one side. Grand, okay, so how do we fix it? Now we're in this situation, we've got to get out of it, and I would be very much more in the positive. But it's not to say I don't have that good rant, and get it out of your system and turn it into positive. And we sometimes see people who are constantly the glass half full, and you're really envious. God, how do they approach everything so positive? That's because their mental fitness is in a really good place. And when your mental fitness is in a good place, you have clear space for thinking. and you make better decisions and your mind is clear and you have a structure and a pathway to how you handle things. When you're in a negative mindset and you don't have what good mental fitness is, everyone's mumbled and it's a scramble and you tend not to be able to make good decisions. That's a kind of a brief overview of what our mental fitness, why and what we should be able to achieve with good mental fitness. And the term resilience has been thrown about a lot. I like the term resilience. I think it's good, and I think being resilient will sort of help answer and help us to cope and find our way through various challenges. So I looked up the definition in the English dictionary, and I kind of like this, looking at the very literal definition of a term and then putting it into whatever context that we need it to be in. So the dictionary definition is the capacity to withstand or to recover quickly from difficulties and toughness. So the first part again, I have no problem with. It is that being able to stand up to really difficult times and adversities and challenges that you have in your life that will come at us no matter what we do. So much in our life is not necessarily under our control. Has been able to handle that. The word toughness I don't like. Ciara's alluded to it already about this kind of stoic nature, this toughness that the jockeys will feel like can't show any weakness. I think you probably do that the same if you're at the sales. Whether you're buying or selling, everything, we got to be this person who's in control and in charge, and in terms of getting your price, in terms of getting through whatever challenge you have within your business, or whether you're in a yard working and you're not getting the respect or the promotion or whatever it is, you've got to come and take this really tough stand. But I think we probably are beginning to see, I hope, a bit of a shift away from using that language when we refer to our industry. And the second definition I really like, so the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape or elasticity. I'm not referring to anybody in the call as either being a substance or an object, but I think it gives a nice visual aid to what resilience is. And what springs to mind is the kids have these fidget squidgy ball things and slime and goo that you can do anything with. You can tear it apart, you can whack it off walls, you can stand on it with your feet, and then magically it all just forms back into the nice shape that it was in to start with. And that probably is, to me, a nice visual as to what resilience is. So you've gone through some tough times, things are really challenging, you've been in a difficult place, but you can come out of that because you have good mental fitness, you have control of those emotions and what you're going through every day, that you can get back into what we call a normal state. So this is when we take resilience and put it into the psychological definition, and it's the ability to cope mentally or emotionally with a crisis or to return to a pre-crisis state quickly. And the word quickly is in both of those definitions, and I think be careful not to think we have to be in a rush to get over things and we have to be in a rush to get back to normal when things are tough. It's not really about being in a rush, but it's really about recognizing that if we stay in a dark negative place, or we stay in a place where we're having difficulty, the longer you're in that space, the more difficult and challenging it is to get up out of it. And I'd often would say when people come to me over the years, and they kind of describe being in this very dark hole, and the further down that hole you go, the further back up you have to climb, and the point where you say I need some help, at least it's the point where you're not falling down any further. So you may still have to work your way back up out of it, but at least when you ask for help and you do something about it, you're putting a stop to that continuous drop off. So that's kind of why the word quickly is in there. And the final one I have for you is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or even significant sources of stress. I think there's two components to this to me that are important. Adapting well, so is about being able to adapt. If we stay very rigid in how we think things, how we view things, how we adapt, or if we don't adapt to challenges and we become very rigid and we don't accept, maybe I need help, or maybe I should listen to this person, or maybe I don't need to be so rigid in my thinking, then I think you're more likely to adapt and to find your way through difficult times with a little bit more ease. And the other thing that's important here is, or even significant sources of stress. You don't have to be in the middle of a major life event to need resilience. I think you're probably facing times every single day in your work where you need to be resilient, where you've had a challenging phone call, where the vet has given you, a field report for the sales, or a mare's lost her foal. You need to be resilient at all of those times throughout your day, your week, every month, every year. And it doesn't have to be this big life event, like I said earlier, if something is stressful for you, it's stressful for you. You can't put it in a comparison and say, well, here's a big list of stuff that's stressful and what's not, and this one doesn't really count. If it's making you feel stressed, then that counts. And that's where resilience comes in. So if that's what we're aiming for, to be resilient and to have good mental fitness, why is that so important? And if we don't achieve that, where are the pitfalls, and what are the worries and the concerns? And again, it's about losing that balance and not being able to control where we're going in our mind, as well as in how we're coping with challenges and with life. And So mood and behavior are two of the very obvious ones, that if we don't have a good mental fitness and we're not balancing those emotions well. And I'd say, so the word euthymic is what we use in psychology or psychiatry. That's where our mood lives along this nice straight line. So we're nice and steady and along the middle. If you zoom in on that line, it's not a straight line. It's lots of peaks and troughs. And so the peaks are when things are good and we're doing great and we're safe and things are going well. And the troughs are when things aren't going so hot. And that in general, we live in harmony with that. We've good days, we've bad days, but overall we live along this nice straight line. The worry is then when we don't have good mental fitness, when we're not able to cope with challenges and with day to day and everything that we have to face, is that we live below the line a little bit longer and more often than we need to, or than we should be doing. And that starts to lead to feelings and behaviors such as depression or anxiety. We get irritable, and that anger is there all the time. We're snappy, we're not making good decisions. People sometimes feel quite isolated and get a bit withdrawn. And that's where we're living down below this line. And if we don't have good mental fitness to try and have the tools and the resilience to get back up again, then that can lead to difficulties with depression and anxiety and mental health illness rather than mental health fitness. It affects our decision making. I said already, this kind of space to do some thinking when you're not coping well, when you're bombarded with things, whether it's a decision about what stallion you're going to send your mare to, whether it's a decision in the yard, do I want to stay in this job, am I getting the rewards, do I need to move? When you're making decisions when things aren't nice and clear and you're not giving yourself time to step out of the franticness and the day-to-day challenges, we don't make poor decisions, and our mental fitness isn't backing up. It's not there in order to give us some clarity in our decision making. Relationships are definitely affected, and this can be at every level. Obviously, the most important ones would be our personal relationships with family, with partners, with kids, with parents. But there's also the relationship that's so key to your day-to-day. You spend most of your day in work. Those key relationship with colleagues in work, and a relationship with your manager or your boss, or your relationship with your staff or with your various stakeholders. And so poor relationships are a direct consequence of not being at ease, not being able to show compassion or love, and being too angry or too sad all of the time. Self-confidence and self-esteem. I mentioned self-esteem earlier. So self-esteem is confidence in your worth, in your self-respect and how you perceive yourself. And in general, we are pre-wired to be negative about ourselves and to be hard on ourselves. So if we're not able to come out with feelings like I am loved, I am worthy, I am good at this, I have good friends, I make good relationships, and I'm successful, then we start to feel the opposite to all of that, and that can be a horribly negative space to live in. And we may see people who are oozing self-esteem, and they can be overconfident, and that can be a little bit annoying as well. But in general, the higher level of our self-esteem, the better our mental fitness is. And I don't know if anyone was watching recently the golf documentary on Netflix called Full Swing, and Breakpoint was the one on tennis, which was released earlier this year. And I find it fascinating, probably because of my interest in sports in general, but looking at sports people at this very high level, and particularly with an individual sport, where they are very much, there's no team to back up. If you have a bad day, there's nothing to prop you up again. And their self-esteem and self-confidence is the only thing that they need to work on, because they're highly skilled, highly technical at their various sports. But when they lose their self-esteem, the whole thing crumbles. And it's quite telling how important self-esteem and self-confidence is. So poor mental fitness leads to distress. Obviously, I keep harping on stress is what it is to you. It's not comparable to other people. But when we get into a distress state, it's usually because our mental fitness isn't backing up what we need to do in the decision making and all of the things I've already mentioned here: mood, behavior, relationships, and being in a place of distress is just that. It is what it says on the tin, and you're not able to adapt and to cope and be resilient, like we said. And then we all know the direct impacts between mental health and physical health, and that works both ways. One will impact the other. And then all of this, if we live in this space and we're feeling these emotions for a long period of time, then that tips us over into mental illness, which is probably what people fear the most. And I think this slide is kind of interesting because it kind of clarifies where we are, I think, in terms of physical health versus mental health. So in general, we know what our body needs to stay healthy and to stay well. We know the good habits that we should have, and we know if our body's not working. So if we get a pain in our chest, we might think that might be my heart. If you have a big red swollen oozy wound on your finger, you'll know that that's infected, and you know how to go to get help for that. You know how to get to your GP, you know how to get to the hospital, and you do something about that. but are we as good at picking up on the signs and the symptoms that our mental fitness is and our mental health isn't doing so well? And I don't think we're quite there yet. And I think that's something people struggle with, identifying, what is wrong with me, or when do I need to get help? And we see people who are very good at looking after their physical health, and they don't eat sugar and they don't drink and they don't have any caffeine and they exercise regularly. And we go, yeah, these fair play. They go to the doctor twice a year and get their blood done and they get their blood pressure checked. And then maybe we look at somebody who is good at looking after their mental fitness, and they meditate and they do yoga and they go to a retreat and they take time out for themselves, and they turn their phone off at 8 o'clock in the evening, and they're out of the office reply always seems to be on, and they never in work, but really it's the weekend, and they're protecting that time. And sometimes I think we look at those people and go, geez, do they ever do any work, or are they, they're not available, and we look at it in a more negative way, when really they're doing exactly what the same person across the road is doing to look after their physical health, and we don't look negatively towards that. I think a lot of it is trying to work out that, or trying to prioritize. You really need to be a little bit selfish to say, well, no, actually, I need to be well. If I'm not well, then nobody around me is going to have a direct impact on everybody else. And I was just reading the headline recently. I don't know, I'm a bit of a Pink fan, the pop star, and she's a new album out, and she was talking on an interview about how after COVID, she's writing a new album. She had to put on a bit of weight, and she was in a really negative space. And so she took herself off for 2 weeks in Spain to a retreat. And she was absolutely unapologetic, because if I don't get myself right, none of this is going to come to fruition. I'm not going to be productive. Now, I absolutely imagine there's no chance of anyone on this call, myself included, getting 2 weeks off to go to a retreat in Spain, although it would be nice. But it's about taking that little bit of time somewhere within your day, your week, or month to say, actually, you know what, it's probably okay if I do that. I had terrible guilt going to get my flipping haircut, and I take the laptop with me and I sit up and I work the whole time because I couldn't be saying not to be working. So it's about trying to take away that guilt and trying to say, actually, this is really important. This is a really important aspect for me and for my work colleagues, and to stay healthy and to put a bit of work into your mental fitness. It's not going to happen if we don't do some work. And in terms of the thoroughbred industry, so Ciara and Lisa have spoken about the statistics, so we can probably slot the breeding sector somewhere in among jockeys, trainers, farmers, notwithstanding. We don't have any specific research for you at the moment yet, but we're very new in sports. I always talk to colleagues in other sports or in other parts of medicine, and I talk about our sport and how nuanced we are and how special we are, and they kind of go, I don't think you're special. I think we actually are really special, but it's more the nuances of our sport. It makes us very unique, and that uniqueness creates challenges as well as all of the positives. And we cover a very large spectrum, so we have people on the call, I'm sure, down to somebody who has one mare and foal, who buys 2 units a year and takes their luck, versus the big international operations. But whether you're big or small, and we say this with the jockeys and the trainers as well, whether you're at the very bottom of the pile, having just taken out your license, 7-point claim, or you're a champion jockey, there are challenges at every single level, and success brings its own challenges as well. So the mental health difficulties don't belong to one particular group. We are all susceptible to them, and we are all liable to if we don't look after ourselves. And we've spoken already about the 24/7 lifestyle that we lead. I knew this already, but during COVID, it was just hammered home to me that there's no barriers as to when we will ask and look for help. So every morning, easily for 2 years, there was a message or a missed call on my phone by 7 o'clock, because someone was in the yard. Past 6, sure, everyone will be up, we're all working. I've forgot my health screening, or I've a sniffle, or I'm a close contact, what'll I do? And the same thing, it could be 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. Well, I'm in the yard, I'm bandaging a horse, or I've gone back to check something. Sure, of course, this is a normal working hour. And I think we need to be really careful, particularly if you're in a manager or an employment role, and the staff WhatsApp groups, that you're there at night time, completely changing someone's entire week on a WhatsApp message that means nothing to you. Bang, I've told them now they're going to sales for the next 4 days. And that person's at home going, oh my God, like, how do I cope with this? How do I say no? Just be a little bit careful, because it's definitely going to play in, and Lisa had mentioned, it's definitely going to play into how we attract and retain staff within the industry, when our expectation is that if I'm out in the yard and I'm working, you ought to be working as well. And we're not quite living in that society anymore. And I think the skill set that we have, the majority of people here on this call, you're in it because you're in your job because your initial love and passion is for the horse. That's where your skills lie, that's what you're good at. And now all of a sudden you're in a job where you're meant to know everything about HR, you're meant to know about accounts, about finance, about pensions for your staff, how to deal with grievances, how to deal with staff discipline, how to order stock, how to invoice owners. And these may be skills that you don't have. And I don't think we're quite savvy or smart enough yet about looking at the people who work for us and getting the right supports around us to lift off a little bit of that pressure. And the whole technology side, where everything has gone online, I would say easily. My father still buys and sells a few foals every year, and there's no way he'd manage or navigate that space without my sister being at home to do it for him, because there's a whole legislative piece registering foals and veterinary certs and certs for travel and fields registry. You know, it's an absolute minefield for people. And then the other thing within our industry is there's a lot of this that is completely out of your control. Equine disease and injuries, foals that don't make it, foals that are crooked, horses that have turned in that you know they're never going to come good. You know, you have a pedigree, you're waiting for the black type to come in, it doesn't come, you're left with stock, you know, and sometimes your window for success is very small. And then I think the economic recession, and I'm sure most breeders will agree, even in really stressful times economy-wise, mostly the racing stockies, trainers, they are affected, but not by the time that trickles down, the breeders are really affected, and you're meant to take the hit. You've got the stock in the ground, 4 years later, you still have that stock in the ground. So we are very new in sport, and you are a particular nuance within our new in sport, if that makes sense. So how do we do it? How do we fix this? What do we do? You're going to go through this slide and say, yes, we know all this already. It's the same stuff that gets poured out time and time again. But the reason the same stuff gets poured out time and time again is because it works, and there's science and research and evidence behind why and how these things work. And some of it's so basic, and you're going to look and roll your eyes and go, Jesus, for like, you know, this is the same old hat. But I think it's really important to try and stop and think about how this fits into your life and your work and your industry. When you tell people about exercise and how important it is, you're all looking at me going, so I spend my entire day on my feet. I come in and I've done 18,000 steps on my pedometer, my watch. How on earth is she telling me you want to do more exercise? But exercise in your work is not going to give you the same benefits that exercise does, and that we know that it's proven to give if you actually go and do a dedicated piece of exercise for yourself. And exercise releases these things called endorphins, and they're natural highs in the body, and they give us this feel-good factor. But that does, you're not going to get a feel-good factor by running around the field after mares or lunging 10 horses for a sales prep or walking your foals for 4 hours during the day. You may be physically exhausted and tired from that, but you've got no psychological benefit from that. It's about trying to choose something that you like, something that you enjoy, and something that fits in with your day. I run 5 or 10K. I never get any faster. I never go any further. I never do any better. But it's not at all for my physical health. It's purely for my mental health. And I can do it in around 25 minutes. So it's not taking hours of my day, and I can run along the canal. I don't have to get into my car to go somewhere. So whatever you choose to do, it has to be something that fits in with your life. And even if that's at the end of your day, walking to the far field and back up again, but you're not going there to catch a mare or fix a fence. You're going there for you. And so much of what we hear in terms of managing our mental health, again, doesn't really fit for you, because it's go out and get at one with nature, listen to the birds, watch the wind in the trees. You know, you're out there listening to this every day, but you're never stopping to take note of it, because it's never within your own control. You're there because it's work. So it's about trying to stop and try to make some of that general advice that we have for the general population, for people who are working in offices 9 to 5. In some ways they look and go, God, you're so privileged, you work outdoors, you have all of that at your fingertips. But if you're in the middle of one of your crazy stressful seasons, breeding seasons, sales seasons, not 1 second do you stop and to listen to the birds thing. So it's about trying to evaluate how you get a little bit of that mindfulness into your everyday. And the diet is really important. I mean, I can't imagine anyone in this room would feed their horse crap or food that didn't fit right, but we are very happy to do that to ourselves. And I think it's a little bit like the racing, and we've done a lot of work with the race courses to try and get the nutrition and race day right for stable staff and for jockeys, because you're on the road, you don't have any other choice. You're eating out of a garage, or you're eating whatever the sales complexes provide for you. If you're in the yard, I could do a show of hands. Who skips breakfast? You go into the garage around lunchtime and have a breakfast roll full of high fat, high sugar, high salt, cup of tea or a can of Red Bull and a bar of chocolate at 4 o'clock, and then you go home and maybe there's someone there to get a home cooked meal, maybe there's not. Maybe you do like cooking, probably you don't. You're sticking something from the freezer on. You're not getting any of the nutrition, and again, this is science-based. We know that we need to fuel ourselves properly, but it takes you to be prepared. You're not going to tell me in the middle of sales season you're going to have your cooking done on a Sunday night and everything in the freezer, batch cooking, you know. So it's about trying to be organized. I'm trying to choose something that's a little bit more healthy. There are fruit and sandwich options available within garages, but it's the quick, easy fix that we tend to crave. Sleep is a really important factor, and I'm going to steal a lot of this from a colleague of mine and Ciara's, Giles Warrington, who's a professor in sports and exercise physiology in Limerick, and he's a big focus on sleep. And I say, despite what everybody says, we do need 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. Because if you can imagine, not all that sleep is restorative sleep. By the time you fall asleep, you wake up a couple of times, you go to the bathroom, you get back into sleep, and then you're waking up again. So you need that 7 or 8 hours every night to try and look after and rest our brains, if you like. And all the usual things: don't eat late at night, don't vigorously exercise late at night, don't drink caffeine late in the evening. But there's a few other really useful tips. The blue light thing is a really important aspect. So the science behind that is the blue light's the LED light. So it's off your computer screen, your phone, your laptop, your iPad, and it reduces melatonin levels. And melatonin is the hormone that we use to sleep. And interestingly, if you're outside, it's natural daylight that raises our melatonin levels. So you're getting loads of natural daylight, but every time you pick up your phone, you're just cancelling that one out. And has a huge impact on your sleep pattern. Routine is important, trying to get to bed at the same time every night, that your bedroom is at a nice temperature, that it's a safe place, it's a quiet place, that you're not getting into your bedroom with your TV and your devices. And a couple of things that he recommends is this idea of your to-do list. So if you're anything like me, I could wake up at any time of the night and go, oh God, I forgot about that. First thing I do, pick up my phone, type it into my calendar, save it. When I'm there, I'm wide awake, I'm not going to sleep, I'll have to scroll through an app, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you're absolutely wide awake. The very worst thing you can do. But Giles talks about writing down your to-do list in your notepad, because you're trying to clear some space in your brain. So take some of that information out of your brain so that you can properly, hopefully, try and switch off when you're going to bed. And this sense of trying to keep your bedtime routine kind of low maintenance, if you like. And it rolls into the next point there, which is focusing on the positives. And again, Giles is a great believer in within your notebook where you write down a couple of the positives for the day. And particularly if you're having a very difficult time and there's lots of stressors on you, it can be difficult to figure that out and to think, well, what good did happen today? And it doesn't necessarily have to be the big wins, or, you know, that you did something hugely successful. Maybe it was that you had a healthy lunch. Maybe it was that you got to bed on time, that you got into work on time that morning. Maybe you gave someone a lift somewhere. Maybe it's just something that you're grateful for that happened in the day. And again, it's trying to reframe your mind before you try and sleep, because when you close your eyes at night in the middle of a very difficult, busy period for you, you've no distraction, and your mind absolutely floods with all of the challenges and all of the fears that you might have. And so to try and offload some of that before you go to sleep can be really helpful. And some people take that further into actual journaling and offloading everything onto paper. Depends on how that works for you. And the other piece is about when you wake at night. If you are a poor sleeper, you need to get up and leave the room. Now, we never do that. We lie there and go, oh, we just lie here, eventually I'll fall asleep. But that's probably a negative thing. To get up, go to a different room. Paper books are brilliant because you will drift off reading a paper book. Don't pick up a Kindle. And we do it, when we were always taught this in college about sleep hygiene, 20-minute cycle. So try to sleep for 20 minutes. If you don't sleep, get up for 20 minutes. Go back to bed. If you can't sleep for 20 minutes, get up for 20 minutes. And eventually that 20-minute cycle, after a few nights, your brain starts to reset itself, and it understands actually when you pick up that book in a different room, now this is bedtime, and you do fall asleep. But sleep is a real difficult factor, and both the farmer research and the jockey research backed up how poor we are at doing that. A couple of other things, and again, Ciara would attest to this in the research. Most people in racing, are in the thoroughbred industry, it is all consuming. We have no other hobbies. We don't do anything else because this is our sport and our hobby, and now we're making a living out. And that can be really negative because we don't get any outlet. And if you meet somebody from other industries or other sports, you do get a wonderful different perspective on things. But we're very insular, and we don't tend to look outside of our own sport. And that's a real miss when we're trying to improve our mental fitness. Structure and routine, goals and priorities. If you're in the middle of foaling season, you don't need me to tell you that you need to get into a routine, because that's not possible. When you get into the sales, breathe-ups are coming up, you're going to roll into store sales, and that rolls right through till Christmas. So trying to get a structure and routine is really difficult. But it is important within that to try and find and look either, you know, week ahead, month ahead, or a year ahead as to where are your times when you might fit in a break, when you might get a holiday, when you might go to your boss and say, you know what, I know there's going to be a quiet spell there, can I get 2 weeks back to back? Or you can try and get some downtime and try and reset. And that can be really difficult. And sometimes it just feels like we're firefighting all the time. We're going from one thing to the next, and we're never actually able to stop. And you talk about this helicopter view where we can look down at ourselves and say, well, where are we and where are we going? And people often find themselves in jobs, you know, rattling along. Things are so busy. You never have time to stop and look up and say, well, what's next? And the jockeys are terrible at that. You know, they get to early 30s and they think about retirement, and there's nothing in place there. And if you're in a job, you know, what are your plans? Have you thought about doing a course in IT? Have you thought about looking into pedigrees? Have you thought about sales work? You know, that you're trying to at all times have a view to where you're going and to set some goals, but set something that's realistic and something that's manageable for you. Staying connected really is about that. A friend who's been harping on to meet up with you for 2 years for a coffee, go and do it. I'm going to caution you to say go for a drink with someone or go for a walk with someone, because staying connected and getting other people's perspective, and Ciara's going to talk in a few minutes about the importance of having one really strong person in your life, but certainly to try to avoid isolation and withdrawal. You're tired, you don't want to go out, you don't want to meet friends, but you know, it can get very dull and very mundane if you're isolating yourself. The alcohol could form an entire seminar in itself. We've seen the statistics and jockeys and trainers. I'm not going to dwell on it, but just be aware of your relationship with alcohol. There are benefits to it, and it's a very social thing. It's very much in our culture as well, both in Ireland and within our racing and in the industry. Like I say, if you think that relationship is not healthy, I'm just going to say to encourage you to try and seek some help for that. And I won't dwell on that one. But like I say to you, it's an entire seminar in itself. And don't be hard on yourself. We are our own worst critics. Try and, like I say, focus on the positives, focus on what has gone well today, this week, this month, and not be so hard on ourselves. Just a few final reflections. I feel always privileged that I get to work in this industry. It's what kept me fully sane through college exams, hospital shifts, crazy long hours and difficult times within my job as a doctor. I used to go out to the point of conflict. Nobody cared what I did. Nobody cared what happened last night on call and the take. You know, it was completely refreshing. And I'm very conscious now that I'm in it as my career rather than my hobby. But there are so many positives within the people that we get to work with every day. The animals are at the core of all of this, the horse, and the rewards and the highs are so high. And that's why we're in it, as Lisa said. We're all chasing the same thing. We're chasing that dream. And the rewards, and that's why we stay in it. But there are challenges. There are challenges with taking the usual advice and adapting that to the lifestyle that we have. We're all time poor, trying to set aside some time to look at your mental fitness, to take the time, go for a walk, to meet up with a friend, to do something other than what is your job. Look at your skill sets, to try and get some people around you to promote staff, to encourage training within your team, to take off some of that pressure with you. And our culture is both positive and negative. And again, I think even just by the number of people who are here tonight, we're starting to see a slight shift in that culture, and hopefully one which will encourage more open discussion down the line. So I'm going to finish up there, and I'm going to hand you back over to Ciara.
Thanks, Jennifer. There's some really, really helpful insights, reflections, tips there. I'm definitely going to rob the 20-minute sleeping one. That's one for putting in my mental skills toolbox. So look, just to kind of talk about, I suppose, the stigma around help-seeking behaviours, and if you notice somebody in your yard or in your workplace that is maybe needs a little bit of support, how would you actually do that, and how would you actually engage them in a conversation? There's definitely a stigma around seeking help for mental health issues, and look, sport and the horse racing community is just a microcosm of mainstream society, and there are issues in mainstream societies. So there are going to be issues in the racing industry as well, and the issues generally are more prevalent for males and more traditional male gender roles, that males should be maybe seen to be more stoic, have a stiff upper lip, kind of suppress maybe their emotions and not really express themselves in any way. There is within, I suppose, it's probably something that I see within my applied work, is that there is a perception that mental illness, mental health, mental issues, that is a weakness. And for me, and from my standpoint, and from the people I engage with and the people that need support, it really genuinely takes courage to face one's problems, and it takes courage to ask for help. It is a sign, for me, it's a sign of total strength to actually engage in the support services that are available to you. And you've probably all seen the Charlie Maxey, the cartoon at Christmas. I don't know if you haven't seen it. It's just kind of a little collection of meaningful stories and reflections. And I love this. I just think this encompasses our industry really well. What's the bravest thing you've ever said? Asked the boy. Help, said the horse. So, okay, how would you do this? This concept of this idea of being one good adult. They're really difficult conversations to actually have with somebody, but they're incredibly important. Your role. So maybe you don't have any mental health issues. Maybe you don't have any, stressors or distresses. Really, we all have stressors. We don't have distresses in our life, but maybe you could be the key person who could be the support, that could be the link to somebody actually getting some support or engaging in some services that would actually help them. And when we look back over people's narrative, jockey stories, athlete stories, or just people who've made it through difficult times, time and time again, people identified what made the difference, helping them through those tough times, was that they had somebody who would listen to them. And they had this idea, this concept of one good adult that supported them. It could have been a family member, it could have been a friend, it could be somebody in work, it could be somebody in the stable, it could be someone in the yard. Okay. Just this concept that it just takes one good adult to support. And then that's not to say you have to have the answers for this particular person, but just listening to people, asking how they are doing, giving somebody time and space to express themselves, not judging somebody when they're struggling with something, is the key to being one good adult. So what does this look like? I suppose a really kind of, I thought a useful thing, a take home kind of tool for you to be able to take away into your workplace. What does this actually look like to be one good adult? So starting, if you notice something with somebody that you're working with or in your family, and you want to have concerns about maybe their behavior or their mood, or they seem a bit down, start your conversation using I statements. So something like you might say, I've noticed you haven't been yourself in the last few weeks. Is there something going on for you? Comment on what you actually see. So the behavior that you're identifying or the pattern that you're seeing. I noticed you haven't been yourself lately. You seem really tired. And then let the person ask then. You're really just sharing your perspective on what you see. So you're not drawing any judgment. You're not kind of, I suppose, trying to pry, but you're just commenting on what you see. But the key is using I statements. Okay, so the opposite effect would be to say, you seem really down. What's going on for you? Okay, so somebody might get a little bit more defensive if you come at the you kind of statements. So always start with I statements. And again, looking for windows of opportunities to have those conversations. So it could be quiet moment after training the horses. It could be easier to talk to somebody when they're already engaged in a different activity. You could be mucking out. You could be in the car. You could be doing another job, whatever it is. So actually having that conversation when it's kind of a little bit more non-threatening, as opposed to sitting down formally, maybe having a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. Invite the person to talk and listen carefully to what they're saying. You definitely do not need to have the answers to the questions, but you can encourage or support them to get help. Or you will say to them, look, I'll go with you. I'll make that phone call with you. I'll bring you to that person. I'll contact Lisa. I'll contact Jennifer with you. We'll do it together. So you certainly do not have to have the answers for them, but you can be that key one good adult or that link person for them to engage in those support services. So again, it's not to be afraid to have these conversations. And again, you don't have to have the answers for the actual individual. And kind of the next lead on and the next kind of piece of the jigsaw within the equuip kind of program is this concept of well-being champions. And we're going to be looking to roll these out over the coming months. And we're looking for different champions in different areas in working location, creating awareness, promoting mental health and well-being across the industry. So we're looking for different people who would like to maybe nominate themselves and being a well-being champion in their particular area. And what we're going to do is train individuals up in resilience training, mental health awareness training, risk management training, bullying and harassment training. So if this is something that you're kind of interested in, you're passionate about, or you'd like to learn more about, we'd love to hear from you to kind of train you up in this particular space of being a well-being champion. And that is it from us. So we would love to hear your comments or questions